The trading post on Nexus 7 hummed with the usual cacophony of commerce. Massive merchants barked orders in their guttural tongue, while delicate ethereal traders floated between stalls, their translucent forms shimmering in the artificial light. In the corner of the main bazaar, hunched over a cup of something that resembled coffee but smelled like burnt rubber, sat Doctor. She was unremarkable by galactic standards. Small, even by human measurements, standing barely 5 feet tall with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her clothes were practical rather than fashionable, worn cargo pants and a faded university t-shirt that had seen better decades. To the casual observer, she appeared to be just another human tourist, perhaps a student or low-level researcher taking in the sights of one of the galaxy's premier trade hubs. The delegation noticed her immediately, though not for any reason that would have flattered her ego. 3 towering reptilian beings, each standing nearly 8 feet tall with scales that gleamed like polished obsidian, they were the stuff of nightmares for most species. Their reputation preceded them across the galaxy as ruthless conquerors who had subjugated dozens of worlds through a combination of superior technology and brutal efficiency. "Look at that pathetic creature," hissed, his forked tongue tasting the air as he gestured toward with one massive clawed hand. "Is that truly what passes for the dominant species on Earth?" Commander, slightly smaller but no less intimidating, let out a sound that might have been laughter if it hadn't been so terrifying. The intelligence reports were accurate then. Weak, fragile, short-lived. It's almost insulting that the Galactic Council considers them worthy of membership. The third, science caste leader, studied with the cold, analytical gaze of a researcher examining a particularly disappointing specimen. "Observe the bone structure. Thin, brittle, the musculature is practically non-existent. I doubt this one could survive even a light gravitational shift, much less actual combat." Continued sipping her not coffee, seemingly oblivious to the attention she was drawing. In reality, she was acutely aware of every word being spoken. The universal translator built into her neural implant was functioning perfectly, and her enhanced hearing, a gift from her years of military augmentation, picked up every whispered insult and casual dismissal. She had heard it all before, of course. Humanity's introduction to the galactic community 3 years ago had been met with everything from curiosity to outright derision. Most species saw humans as they saw now, soft, weak, lacking in any meaningful physical capabilities. The fact that humans had somehow managed to develop faster-than-light travel was generally attributed to luck rather than ingenuity. "Perhaps we should test the specimen," rumbled, his massive frame moving with surprising grace as he approached its table. "See if the reports of human fragility are as accurate as they appear." Looked up from her drink, meeting this gaze with calm brown eyes. "Can I help you?" The casual way she addressed them as caused to snort in what might have been amusement. Among most species, proper honorifics and displays of submission were expected when addressing leadership. This small human either had no idea who she was speaking to, or she simply didn't care. "We are curious about your species," said, his voice carrying the measured tones of scientific inquiry. "Our research indicates that humans are among the most physically limited sapient species in the known galaxy. Is this assessment accurate?" Tilted her head slightly, considering the question. "Physically limited in what way?" "Strength, speed, durability," listed, his claws clicking against the metal table as he leaned closer. "By every meaningful metric, humans appear to be evolutionary failures, yet somehow you have achieved space flight and been granted council membership. We find this puzzling." Ah nodded, taking another sip of her drink. "You're wondering how such weak creatures manage to get off their home planet and into the galactic community." "Precisely," confirmed. "Perhaps you could enlighten us." Was quiet for a moment, seeming to gather her thoughts. Around them, the normal bustle of the trading post continued, but she could sense that their conversation was beginning to draw attention from other patrons. Word of presence always spread quickly, and most species gave them a wide berth. "You know," she said finally, "I think there might be a fundamental misunderstanding about what makes a species dangerous." The three exchanged glances. Here was this fragile little creature, sitting calmly in their presence while most beings would be trembling or fleeing, and she was suggesting that they had misunderstood something about warfare and survival. "Please," said with mock politeness, "educate us." Smiled, and for just a moment, something flickered in her eyes that might have given a more perceptive observer pause. Most species in the galaxy seem to think that physical strength is the ultimate determinant of survival. Bigger claws, thicker armor, faster reflexes. And don't get me wrong, those things matter. But they're not everything. She gestured around the trading post, taking in the diverse array of species conducting business. Look around you. How many of these species would you consider physically superior to humans? All of them answered without hesitation. Probably true, agreed. So why aren't any of them expanding their territory the way humans have been? Why isn't the galaxy full of colonies or ethereal research stations or mining operations? It was a fair question, and one that they hadn't particularly considered. Most species in the galaxy were content with their established territories and traditional ways of life. Humans, despite their apparent physical limitations, had been aggressively exploring and colonizing new worlds since achieving FTL capability. Desperation, suggested. Weak species often expand rapidly in search of resources they cannot efficiently extract from there. Maybe, said, or maybe humans approach expansion differently than other species. Maybe we've had to develop different strategies because we can't rely on being the biggest, strongest, or fastest. She finished her drink and stood up, and they were struck again by just how small she was. The top of her head barely reached chest, and her entire frame looked like it could be snapped in half without much effort. You mentioned testing, she said casually. Did you have something specific in mind? The question caught them off guard. Most species, when faced with implied threats from warriors, tended toward either immediate submission or panicked flight, seemed genuinely curious about what they had in mind. We could arrange a simple physical challenge, offered. Nothing harmful, merely a demonstration of basic capabilities. Nodded thoughtfully. That sounds reasonable. What did you have in mind? Gestured toward the far end of the trading post, where a section had been set up for various recreational activities. Among the attractions was a strength-testing device popular with mercenaries and traders looking to settle disputes or simply show off. A simple trial of strength, he suggested. You against one of us, winner chooses the stakes. Interesting, said, and if I refuse? Then we confirm our suspicions about human weakness and report accordingly to our superiors, said with what he probably thought was diplomatic tact. Considered this for a moment. They were known for their detailed reporting and analysis of potential threats. A negative assessment from them could significantly impact humanity's standing in the galactic community, potentially leading to reduced trade opportunities or exclusion from important council decisions. All right, she said finally, but I have a counter-proposal. The three waited, curious despite themselves. Instead of a simple strength test, why don't we make it more interesting? A series of challenges, physical, mental, tactical, best 2 out of 3 wins overall. His eyes glittered with predatory interest. And the stakes. If you win, I'll provide you with detailed intelligence on human military capabilities and expansion plans. Full tactical assessments, defensive capabilities, everything you'd need to plan an effective invasion. They exchanged glances. This was far more valuable than they had hoped to gain from a simple demonstration of human weakness. Such intelligence would be worth its weight in quantum crystals to the High Command. And if you win, asked. Smile was pleasant, almost friendly. Then you leave human space alone, completely. No raids, no exploratory missions, no testing our defenses. You find somewhere else to expand your territory. The audacity of the proposal was breathtaking. Here was this tiny human woman, offering to stake the safety of her entire species on her personal ability to outperform warriors in direct competition. You would risk your entire civilization on your individual capabilities? Asked, his tone suggesting he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Would you? Countered. It was a fair question. Culture was built around individual strength and capability, but even the most confident warrior would hesitate to stake their entire species' future on their personal performance. This is acceptable, decided after a moment of consideration, though we should formalize the terms. Over the next hour, they worked out the details of their competition with the assistance of a neutral arbitrator who specialized in interspecies disputes. The challenges would be threefold: a test of physical capability, a test of mental acuity, and a test of tactical thinking. Each would be conducted under standardized conditions with full monitoring to prevent cheating. Word of the competition spread quickly through the trading post. Within hours, betting pools had been established and viewing areas set up. The prospect of watching a human compete directly against warriors was too entertaining for most species to miss. Spent the time before the competition quietly, reviewing the agreed-upon rules and conditions. She seemed remarkably calm for someone who had just staked the future of her species on her personal abilities. "You realize this is insane, right?" The voice belonged to Captain, a human freighter pilot who had recognized her from across the trading post. "There's no way you can outmuscle a warrior. They're twice your size and 3 times your strength." Looked up from her preparations. "Probably true." "Then why are you doing this? There's got to be another way to handle diplomatic relations with the—" She was quiet for a moment, considering her response. "How long have you been flying freight runs?" 15 years, why? Ever been in a real fight? Life or death, no holds barred, kill or be killed. Shifted uncomfortably. No, nothing like that. Some bar brawls when I was younger, but nothing serious. Nodded. Most people haven't. Most species haven't, really. They've been part of the galactic community for so long that they've forgotten what it takes to survive when survival isn't guaranteed. She stood up and began some light stretching exercises. Her movements were economical and precise, suggesting training and experience far beyond what her academic appearance would indicate. "The thing about humans," she continued, "is that we've never had the luxury of assuming we'd survive. Our entire evolutionary history has been about adapting to threats that were bigger, stronger, faster, and better armed than we were. We've had to get creative." The first challenge was set to begin in an hour. The physical test would be conducted in the trading post's recreational area, which had been cleared and set up with monitoring equipment. Representatives from multiple species had gathered to observe, and the betting had grown intense. Spent the remaining time in quiet preparation, running through mental exercises and reviewing tactical considerations. To most observers, she appeared calm to the point of detachment, as if the outcome of the competition was of purely academic interest to her. By contrast, were conducting elaborate warm-up rituals involving displays of strength and intimidation tactics designed to psychologically dominate their opponents before competition even began. Who would be facing in the physical challenge was particularly impressive, easily lifting weights that would have been impossible for most species to even budge. "Final betting is now closed," announced the arbitrator. "Odds are currently 47-1 in favor of the delegation." Smiled at that. 47-1. If there had been any doubt about how the galactic community viewed humanity's chances in direct confrontation, those odds made it crystal clear. "Competitors to the challenge area," the arbitrator called. Walked calmly toward the designated space, acknowledging the crowd with a small wave that seemed almost absurdly casual given the circumstances. Stalked toward his position with the predatory grace of a born hunter, his massive frame casting shadows over the smaller human as they took their positions. The physical challenge was elegantly simple, a test of functional strength using standardized equipment calibrated for interspecies competition. Competitors would attempt to achieve the highest possible score across a series of exercises designed to measure different aspects of physical capability. "Competitors ready?" the arbitrator asked. Nodded curtly, his focus entirely on the equipment before him. Simply said, "Ready." "Begin." Attacked the first exercise with devastating efficiency, his massive frame and natural strength allowing him to achieve scores that drew appreciative murmurs from the crowd. His performance was technically perfect and impressively powerful, exactly what everyone expected from a warrior. Approached her turn with a different strategy entirely. Where had relied on raw power, she focused on technique and efficiency. Her movements were precise and economical, wasting no energy on unnecessary displays of strength. The crowd watched with growing interest as her scores began to accumulate. While she couldn't match raw power output, her technique was flawless, and she was achieving far better results than anyone had expected. "Interesting," observed, too. "She appears to have trained specifically for efficiency rather than maximum output." "Trained where?" wondered. "Our intelligence suggests humans lack any significant martial tradition." It was a fair question, and one that wasn't planning to answer any time soon. Let them wonder about the specifics of her background. The important thing was performing well enough to keep their attention and respect. The physical challenges continued for nearly 2 hours, with both competitors pushing themselves through increasingly difficult tests. Scores remained consistently higher in terms of raw output, but technical precision was beginning to narrow the gap in several categories. Final exercise, the arbitrator announced. Endurance challenge. Competitors will continue until failure or voluntary withdrawal. This was where had expected to have her best chance. Humans might not be the strongest or fastest species in the galaxy, but their endurance capabilities were genuinely exceptional. Most species were built for short bursts of intense activity followed by extended rest periods. Humans could maintain moderate activity levels for extended periods that would exhaust other species. The challenge was simple: maintain a level of physical output for as long as possible. The equipment would monitor performance and automatically disqualify anyone whose output fell below the minimum threshold. Began strongly, his powerful frame easily maintaining the required level of activity. Settled into a steady rhythm, her breathing controlled, and her movements economical. 20 minutes in was still going strong, though his breathing was becoming more labored. Showed no signs of stress or fatigue. 40 minutes in, his output began to fluctuate slightly as his massive frame started to work against him. Continued steadily, her technique remaining precise despite the extended duration. An hour in was clearly struggling. His natural advantages in strength and size were becoming disadvantages as his body demanded more oxygen and energy to maintain performance. Was still going steady, though she was finally showing signs of exertion. At 1 hour and 23 minutes, his output dropped below the minimum threshold, and he was automatically disqualified. Continued for another 7 minutes before voluntarily withdrawing, having clearly established her superiority in the endurance category. The crowd was stunned. A human had just outperformed a warrior in direct physical competition. It shouldn't have been possible, and yet everyone had witnessed it happen. Final scoring for the physical challenge, the arbitrator announced after reviewing all the results. Competitor achieved a total score of 847 points across all categories. Competitor achieved a total score of 863 points. Winner of the physical challenge. The silence that followed was profound. Had not only competed effectively against a warrior, she had actually won. The implications were staggering for every species that had assumed human physical limitations made them inherently non-threatening. Accepted the victory with quiet dignity, showing none of the celebration that might have been expected. She simply nodded to the arbitrator and began preparing for the next challenge. Was less gracious in defeat. "This proves nothing," he snarled. "Physical capability is only one aspect of warfare. Mental acuity and tactical thinking remain." "Of course," agreed pleasantly. "Shall we proceed to the next challenge?" The mental acuity test was scheduled to begin after a short break, during which the betting odds shifted dramatically. 47-1 had become 3-1 practically overnight as the galactic community their assumptions about human capabilities. Use the break to hydrate and review the parameters of the next challenge. The mental acuity test would involve complex problem-solving under time pressure, requiring competitors to demonstrate both analytical thinking and rapid decision-making capabilities. Would be her opponent for this round, and he was approaching the challenge with considerably more respect than had shown initially. The science cast leader was known for his analytical capabilities and strategic thinking, and he had no intention of underestimating his opponent again. "Competitors to the challenge area," the arbitrator called. The mental challenge setup was more sophisticated than the physical test, involving holographic displays and complex data sets that competitors would need to analyze and respond to within strict time limits. The problems were designed to be species-neutral, testing pure analytical capability rather than specialized knowledge. Competitors ready. Ready, both, and responded simultaneously. Begin. The first problem materialized in the holographic display. A complex logistics puzzle involving the optimal distribution of resources across multiple locations with varying constraints and priorities. Competitors had 15 minutes to develop and present their solutions. Studied the problem carefully, her mind automatically breaking it down into component parts and analyzing the relationships between different variables. This was familiar territory for her, though not for reasons that anyone present would have guessed. Approached the problem with systematic thoroughness, his analytical mind working through each element in careful sequence. His methodology was impressive and his reasoning sound, exactly what would be expected from a member of the science cast. When time was called, both competitors presented their solutions to a panel of neutral evaluators. His answer was technically correct and demonstrated solid analytical thinking. Solution was not only correct, but optimized in ways that the evaluators hadn't anticipated, achieving better results with more efficient resource utilization. Round 1 to competitor, the arbitrator announced. The pattern continued through subsequent problems. Solutions were consistently good, demonstrating the kind of methodical thinking that had made the science cast renowned throughout the galaxy. Solutions were consistently better, showing not just analytical capability but creative thinking and optimization strategies that surprised even the expert evaluators. Final round, the arbitrator announced. Strategic scenario. Competitors will be presented with a complex tactical situation and asked to develop response strategies within a 30-minute time limit. The scenario that materialized was a nightmare of competing priorities and limited resources. A multi-front conflict with insufficient forces to address all threats simultaneously. Competitors would need to prioritize objectives, allocate resources, and develop strategies that could succeed despite significant disadvantages. Studied the scenario with quiet intensity, her mind working through possibilities and contingencies with practiced efficiency. This was very much her element, though again for reasons that remained her secret. Was clearly in his element as well, his strategic thinking capabilities fully engaged as he analyzed the tactical situation. This was exactly the kind of complex problem that the science cast was trained to handle, and his confidence was visible as he worked through potential solutions. When time was called, presented his strategy first. It was comprehensive and well-reasoned, addressing the major threats while accepting calculated risks in secondary areas. The evaluators nodded approvingly at his systematic approach and sound tactical thinking. His presentation was different in fundamental ways, where it focused on managing the presented challenges, had looked for ways to change the parameters of the conflict entirely. Her strategy involved unconventional tactics and asymmetric approaches that turned apparent weaknesses into advantages. Interesting, one of the evaluators noted. Competitor's approach assumes capabilities not explicitly stated in the scenario parameters. Such as, asked, the ability to operate effectively behind enemy lines, conduct sabotage operations, and coordinate with irregular forces. The scenario assumes conventional military capabilities only. Smiled, I was asked to develop a strategy that could succeed despite significant disadvantages. Conventional strategies with conventional forces weren't going to work, so I assumed unconventional capabilities would be available if needed. And if they weren't available, another evaluator asked. Then you develop them, said simply. Adaptation and innovation aren't optional when you're facing extinction. The evaluators conferred among themselves before announcing their decision. Competitor strategy demonstrates excellent conventional tactical thinking and would likely succeed under standard combat conditions. Competitor strategy demonstrates exceptional creative thinking and would likely succeed under any conditions, though it assumes capabilities that most species do not possess. Winner of the mental challenge. The crowd was now openly murmuring in amazement. A human had just defeated competitors in both physical and mental challenges, achieving what should have been impossible given everything the galaxy thought it knew about human limitations. Had won 2 out of 3 challenges, meaning she had won the overall competition. The implications were staggering. Humanity had just demonstrated capabilities that fundamentally challenged the galactic community's understanding of species classification and threat assessment. The final challenge is now unnecessary, the arbitrator announced. Competitor has achieved victory in 2 of 3 planned contests and is declared the overall winner. Nodded graciously and approached the delegation. All 3 warriors were staring at her with expressions that mixed respect, confusion, and perhaps a touch of concern. Congratulations, said stiffly. You have demonstrated capabilities we did not anticipate. Thank you, replied. I trust this means our agreement stands. nodded slowly. Though we'll honor our commitment, human space will remain unmolested. Excellent, said, though I hope this might lead to more positive relations between our species in the future. Was studying her with unconcealed curiosity. Doctor, if I may ask, what is your background? Your capabilities suggest training and experience far beyond what we expected from a human civilian. Considered her response carefully. The truth was complicated, and she wasn't sure how much she wanted to reveal just yet. I've had an interesting career, she said finally. Multiple disciplines, varied experiences. Humans tend to be generalists rather than specialists. It wasn't really an answer, and everyone present knew it. But it was clear that wasn't going to provide more details without good reason. The crowd began to disperse as the formal competition concluded, but could feel eyes on her from multiple directions. Word of the competition would spread quickly through the galactic community, and humanity's status was about to change dramatically. Captain approached her as she gathered her belongings. That was incredible, he said. I had no idea humans could compete at that level. Smiled, most humans probably couldn't. I've had some advantages. What kind of advantages? She considered the question while finishing her preparations to leave. Around them, the trading post was returning to its normal rhythm, though conversations were notably more animated than usual. She said finally, "How much do you know about human military history?" Not much, he admitted. I know we had wars and conflicts before achieving space flight, but doesn't every species? Shouldered her pack and started walking toward the transport station. Not like humans did. Most species fight for territory or resources, clear objectives, rational strategies. Humans fought for ideas, for concepts that couldn't be or divided up. She paused at the station entrance and looked back at the trading post, where she had just fundamentally altered humanities, standing in the galactic community. They made a mistake, she said quietly. They saw our physical limitations and assumed we were weak, but they never asked the important question. Which was? Smile was pleasant, almost friendly, but there was something in her eyes that found oddly unsettling. They never asked what made us dangerous. The news of victory spread through the galaxy faster than even the most optimistic human observers had anticipated. Within 48 hours, every major species council and trading consortium had received detailed reports of the competition. The implications were staggering and immediate. Herself had departed Nexus 7 on a commercial transport bound for the sector, seemingly unconcerned with the galactic upheaval her performance had triggered. To fellow passengers, she appeared to be nothing more than a quiet academic taking a routine trip between research stations. Admiral Iran of the Defense Fleet was not nearly so calm. The 8-foot-tall crystalline being stood before a holographic display showing tactical assessments of human capabilities, his natural luminescence flickering with agitation. This changes everything, he announced to his assembled staff. If this human female's capabilities are representative of her species, then our entire strategic assessment of Sector 7 requires complete revision. His intelligence chief, a methodical being from the collective, projected additional data overlays onto the display. Respectfully, Admiral, we may be overreacting. This could be an exceptional individual rather than a representative sample. Could be, Admiral Iran agreed. But can we afford to assume that? They are among the most physically capable warriors in known space. If humans can compete with them directly, what does that mean for our own defensive capabilities? It was a question being asked across the galaxy. Species that had dismissed humanity as irrelevant were suddenly recalculating threat assessments and defensive strategies. The comfortable assumption that physical superiority guaranteed military supremacy had been shattered by a single human woman. Meanwhile, aboard the transport ship Stellar Wanderer was engaged in what appeared to be casual conversation with a trader named. The being was known throughout the sector as a collector of rare information, and she had approached with what seemed like simple curiosity about human culture. Your species fascinates me, said, her compound eyes glittering with interest. The reports from Nexus 7 suggest capabilities that our databases did not predict. How did humans develop such diverse talents? Sipped her coffee, one of the few human luxuries available on commercial transports. Necessity, mostly. Earth wasn't a particularly hospitable planet, and we weren't the dominant species for most of our evolutionary history. But you achieved dominance eventually. Eventually, confirmed. Though not through superior physical capabilities, we had to be more adaptable, more creative in our survival strategies. Santeni twitched with curiosity. Could you elaborate? Was quiet for a moment, considering how much to reveal. There were neutral traders with no military ambitions, but information had a way of spreading through their networks in unpredictable ways. Most species evolve in environments where they can specialize, she said finally. Predators, prey, environmental specialists. Humans evolved as generalists in an environment that kept changing the rules. We had to learn to adapt quickly to survive. And this adaptability translates to combat effectiveness. Smile was enigmatic. It translates to survival effectiveness. Combat is just one possible survival scenario. What didn't know, and what wasn't about to reveal, was the true extent of her personal background. Doctor was indeed a researcher and academic, but her doctorate was in applied military psychology, and her research focused on asymmetric warfare strategies. She had spent 12 years in various human military units before transitioning to academic work, and her fragile appearance was the result of careful genetic optimization designed to maximize efficiency rather than appearance. The human military had learned early in their space exploration efforts that physical intimidation was a losing strategy when dealing with species that outweighed humans by factors of 2 or 3. Instead, they had focused on developing capabilities that played to human strengths: adaptability, endurance, tactical creativity, and psychological warfare. Herself was a product of the Human Special Operations Command's Project Nightshade, an experimental program designed to create operatives capable of functioning effectively in alien environments against superior physical opposition. She was one of only 47 successful graduates, and her presence at Nexus 7 had been no accident. Human intelligence had been tracking expansion plans for months, and its mission had been to assess their capabilities and intentions without revealing the true extent of human military development. The public competition had been an improvised response to an unexpected opportunity, though one she had been thoroughly prepared for. "Will you be remaining in the sector long?" asked, interrupting's thoughts. "A few weeks," replied. "I'm attending a conference on xenobiology at the research station on 442C. It was a partial truth. There was indeed a xenobiology conference and was registered to attend. What she didn't mention was that the conference was being used as cover for a much more sensitive gathering, a meeting of human intelligence operatives from across the galaxy to discuss the implications of recent activities. The Stellar Wanderer docked at station 18 hours later and made her way through the usual chaos of a major transport hub. Station was one of the galaxy's primary commercial centers, a massive construction that housed nearly 2 million beings from dozens of species. It was also, not coincidentally, one of the galaxy's primary intelligence gathering centers. Had barely cleared customs when she was approached by a familiar figure. Commander Sarah, Captain's older sister and handler in the Special Operations Command, appeared to be just another human tourist consulting her travel guide. "Doctor," Sarah said pleasantly, "what a pleasant surprise running into you here." Commander replied with equal pleasantness, "How nice to see you again." To any observer, it would have appeared to be a chance encounter between old acquaintances. In reality, it was a carefully orchestrated contact following protocols developed over years of covert operations. They made small talk while walking through the station's commercial district, their conversation covering mundane topics while their real communication took place through subtle hand signals and coded phrases. By the time they parted company, had received her updated mission parameters, and Sarah had received a detailed briefing on the Nexus 7 incident. The conference on 442C was scheduled to begin in 3 days, giving time to establish her cover and conduct preliminary reconnaissance of the research station. She booked passage on a small passenger shuttle and settled in for the 6-hour journey to the Outer System Research Facility. 442C was an unremarkable world by galactic standards, notable primarily for its unique ecosystem that had evolved in isolation for millions of years. The research station orbiting the planet was home to scientists from across the galaxy, all drawn by the opportunity to study evolutionary processes in unprecedented detail. cover as doctor, xenobiology researcher, was thoroughly documented and completely legitimate. She had indeed published papers on evolutionary adaptation, though her real interest was in how species adapted to military pressures rather than environmental ones. The research station's director, an elderly named doctor, greeted her with the enthusiastic welcome typically reserved for distinguished visitors. "Doctor, your reputation precedes you, especially after the remarkable demonstration at Nexus 7. We are honored to have you attend our conference." Accepted the greeting with appropriate gratitude while mentally the station's layout and security measures. The research facility was lightly defended, relying on its neutral status and isolation for protection. It would be an ideal location for covert activities, assuming one could avoid drawing unwanted attention. "I understand you've done groundbreaking work on adaptive evolution," Doctor continued as he escorted her through the facility. "Your insights into survival strategies could be invaluable to our research here." "I'm looking forward to the exchange of ideas," replied truthfully. "Understanding how species adapt to survive is endlessly fascinating." Her accommodations were Spartan but adequate, a small research suite with basic living facilities and full access to the station's scientific databases. Spent her first evening reviewing conference materials and updating her own research notes, maintaining her cover while preparing for more sensitive activities. The real meeting began at 200 station time, when made her way through darkened corridors to a supposedly empty laboratory in the station's research wing. To anyone monitoring security systems, she appeared to be conducting late-night research on her own projects. The laboratory contained 4 other figures, all appearing to be engaged in various scientific activities. Commander was examining biological specimens, while Doctor was running genetic sequencing protocols. Agent Lisa Park was reviewing data feeds, and Colonel James Harrison was conducting what appeared to be mineral analysis. To casual observation, it looked like dedicated researchers working late on their projects. In reality, it was a gathering of humanity's most experienced intelligence operatives, brought together to address the most serious strategic challenge humans had faced since achieving space flight. "Report," Colonel Harrison said quietly, his voice barely audible over the laboratory's ambient noise. Provided a detailed briefing on her encounter with the delegation, including her assessment of their military capabilities, strategic thinking, and psychological profiles. Her analysis was thorough and professional, covering not just what had happened, but what it revealed about intentions and capabilities. "They're definitely planning something," she concluded. The delegation at Nexus 7 wasn't just conducting routine intelligence gathering. They were specifically probing human defensive capabilities, and they had detailed information about our expansion patterns. Commander nodded grimly. "We've been tracking increased activity across multiple sectors. Long-range reconnaissance, detailed mapping of shipping routes, analysis of defensive installations, all consistent with pre-invasion planning." Doctor looked up from his sequencing protocols. "Have we determined their timeline?" "Unknown," Agent Park replied while reviewing her data feeds. "But the acceleration in intelligence gathering suggests they're moving from planning to preparation phases. 6 months to 2 years would be my estimate." Colonel Harrison was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. They were one of the galaxy's premier military powers, with a proven track record of successful conquests. If they were planning to target human space, the consequences could be catastrophic. "Options?" he asked finally. "Limited," admitted. "Direct military confrontation isn't viable. They outnumber us, outgun us, and have significantly more combat experience. Conventional defensive strategies won't work." "Which brings us to unconventional strategies," Commander observed. It was the conversation had been hopping for and dreading in equal measure. Humanity's survival might depend on strategies that pushed the boundaries of acceptable warfare, tactics that other species would find morally questionable at best. "Project Nightshade protocols?" Doctor asked. Nodded slowly. "Modified and expanded. We can't fight them in conventional military engagements, but we might be able to make conquest too expensive to be worthwhile." Colonel Harrison leaned back in his chair, considering the implications. Project Nightshade had been controversial even within human military circles, focusing on psychological warfare, sabotage operations, and tactics designed to undermine enemy morale rather than achieve decisive military victories. The galactic community wouldn't approve, he noted. The galactic community won't survive if they succeed in their expansion plans, countered. Once they've conquered human space and absorbed our technological capabilities, no other species will be able to resist them effectively. It was a sobering assessment, but one that aligned with intelligence analyses from across human space. The expansion pattern suggested they were building toward a campaign of galactic domination, using each conquered species to strengthen their capabilities for the next conquest. Recommendations, Colonel Harrison asked. Had spent weeks developing her strategy, refining it through multiple scenarios and contingencies. Phase 1, intelligence penetration and sabotage operations targeting logistics and command structures. Phase 2, psychological warfare designed to undermine their confidence and create internal divisions. Phase 3, asymmetric resistance operations if conventional defense fails. Timeline. Phase 1 begins immediately. We have perhaps 6 months before they're ready to move, and we need that time to establish operational networks and identify critical vulnerabilities. Commander was reviewing deployment schedules on her handheld device. Personnel requirements. All available Nightshade operatives, plus selected volunteers from regular military units. We'll need people capable of long-term deep cover operations in hostile territory. Doctor looked concerned. That's essentially our entire special operations capability. If this fails, we'll have no reserves. Met his gaze steadily. If this fails, we won't need reserves. The war will be over. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, covering operational details, communication protocols, and contingency planning. By the time they dispersed back to their respective research activities, humanity had committed itself to the most dangerous military strategy in its history. Returned to her quarters and spent the remaining hours before dawn refining her tactical assessments and updating her mission parameters. In a few hours, she would need to resume her role as doctor, xenobiology researcher, attending scientific conferences and making polite conversation with alien scientists. But her real work was just beginning. Over the next several months, she would need to establish operational networks across multiple star systems, recruit and train operatives capable of functioning behind enemy lines, and develop the intelligence infrastructure necessary to support asymmetric warfare against a superior opponent. The Xenobiology Conference began as scheduled, with presenting her research on adaptive evolution to an audience of distinguished scientists. Her presentation was well received, particularly her insights into how species developed survival strategies when faced with existential threats. Fascinating work, commented Doctor, a prominent scientist who had attended the conference. Your analysis of survival adaptations is remarkably thorough. Smiled pleasantly, giving no indication that she recognized Doctor as one of the science cast's leading strategic analysts. Thank you. I find that understanding how species adapt to pressure is endlessly instructive. Indeed, Doctor agreed. I would be interested in discussing your findings further, perhaps over dinner. It was an opportunity couldn't pass up, though she would need to be extremely careful. Doctor was almost certainly conducting his own intelligence gathering, and one mistake could compromise the entire operation. I would be delighted, she replied. They dined that evening in the station's main restaurant, maintaining pleasant conversation while each tried to extract information from the other. To other diners, they appeared to be colleagues sharing scientific insights. In reality, they were engaged in a complex game of intelligence and counterintelligence. Your species has achieved remarkable success in such a short time, Doctor noted while sampling the seafood. From isolated planet to galactic community membership in less than a century. Humans tend to be adaptable, replied. We've had to be given our physical limitations. Ah yes, the physical limitations. Though your recent demonstration suggests those may be less significant than previously believed. Shrugged modestly, I've been fortunate in my training opportunities. Doctor's eyes glittered with interest. What sort of training produces such capabilities? It was a direct probe, professionally delivered but unmistakably aimed at gathering intelligence about human military capabilities. Had expected the question and prepared her response carefully. Academic training mostly. Research methodology, analytical thinking, physical fitness requirements for field work. Nothing particularly exotic. Field work in xenobiology requires such extensive physical preparation. When you're studying potentially dangerous organisms in hostile environments, yes, physical capability and mental adaptability are essential survival traits. Doctor nodded thoughtfully, apparently accepting her explanation while filing the information for future analysis. They continued their conversation for another hour, each probing carefully while revealing as little as possible about their real objectives. When they parted company, was confident that she had maintained her cover while gathering valuable intelligence about strategic thinking. Doctor's questions had revealed assumptions about human capabilities and intentions that would be invaluable for planning future operations. She spent the next 3 days attending conference sessions and making connections with scientists from across the galaxy, all while establishing the communication networks and operational protocols that Project Nightshade would require. By the time she departed 442C, the foundation for humanity's most ambitious covert operation was in place. Its next destination was the system, where she would meet with human colonial administrators to discuss xenobiology research opportunities in the outer territories. In reality, she would be establishing safe houses and operational bases for deep cover operatives preparing to infiltrate space. The passenger transport that carried her away from 442C was typical of civilian vessels, crowded, noisy, and filled with beings from dozens of species pursuing their own private business. Appeared to be reading research papers, but she was actually reviewing intelligence reports and operational plans. Humanity was about to embark on a strategy that would either save their species from conquest or provoke a war they couldn't possibly win through conventional means. Had helped design that strategy, and now she would help implement it. As the transport ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying her toward her next mission, reflected on the irony of her situation. The galaxy saw humans as physically weak and technologically inferior, assumptions that had shaped every interaction since first contact. Those assumptions were about to become humanity's greatest strategic advantage. The other species would learn too late that physical strength wasn't the only way to wage war, and that sometimes the most dangerous opponents were those who appeared least threatening. They had underestimated her fragility, never realizing that fragility had taught her species every way to fight that didn't require being the biggest or strongest. Soon, they would discover what made humans truly dangerous. 8 months after the Nexus 7 incident, the galaxy faced its greatest crisis in recorded history. They had launched simultaneous invasions of 17 star systems, overwhelming defensive fleets with coordinated precision that stunned military analysts across known space. Within 48 hours, they had established control over critical trade routes and isolated entire sectors from mutual support. Stood on the observation deck of the research station, watching warships maintain their blockade of the Tau system. To any observer, she appeared to be a stranded civilian, trapped by circumstances beyond her control. The reality was far different. For the past 8 months, and her network of operatives had been preparing for exactly this scenario. While the galaxy focused on conventional military preparations, Project Nightshade had been establishing an entirely different kind of warfare infrastructure. Now, as conventional forces crumbled before superiority, humanity's real defense was about to begin. Doctor, the voice belonged to Station Commander Tors, a nervous administrative officer who had been struggling to maintain order as reports of victories poured in from across the galaxy. We've received another communication from the fleet. They're demanding complete surrender and full cooperation with their occupation forces. Turned from the viewport, her expression carefully composed to show concern rather than the cold calculation she was actually feeling. What are our options, Commander? Limited, Tors admitted. We have no military vessels, no defensive capabilities, and no hope of rescue. The entire sector is under control. It was true from a conventional perspective. The research station was defenseless, isolated, and completely at the mercy of the occupying forces. What Commander Tors didn't know was that the station's civilian population included 12 of humanity's most experienced covert operatives, all of whom had been positioned there months ago in preparation for exactly this scenario. I suppose we have no choice but to comply, said with apparent reluctance. though I hope they'll allow us to continue our research work. Commander Torres nodded grimly. I'll inform them that we accept their terms. 3 hours later, the first transport arrived at the station. Watched from her laboratory as armored warriors disembarked, their massive forms moving with predatory confidence through the corridors she had come to know so well. To them, this was just another easy conquest, another helpless research facility to be and controlled. Or the officer assigned to oversee the station's occupation was typical of his species' military leadership. Tall, powerful, and supremely confident, he had participated in 7 successful planetary conquests and saw no reason why this assignment should be any different. All civilian personnel will report to the main assembly hall for processing, he announced through the station's communication system. Cooperation will be rewarded, resistance will be eliminated. Joined the stream of researchers and support staff making their way to the assembly hall, her appearance and behavior indistinguishable from the genuinely frightened civilians around her. She had spent years perfecting the art of appearing harmless and unremarkable, a skill that was about to prove invaluable. The processing was efficient and thorough. Intelligence officers interviewed each civilian, their skills, and determining their potential value to the occupation forces. Scientists and engineers were classified as essential personnel and assigned to continue their work under supervision. Administrative staff were deemed non-essential and assigned to maintenance duties. This interview was conducted by Science Cast Leader, a different individual from the one she had faced at Nexus 7, but equally confident in superiority. He reviewed her credentials with professional interest. Dr. Xenobiology Specialist, he read from his data pad. Your research focuses on adaptive evolution in hostile environments. That's correct, replied, maintaining the nervous demeanor expected from a conquered civilian. I study how organisms develop survival strategies when faced with existential threats. Made notes on his device. Such research could be valuable to our expansion efforts. You will continue your work under direction, focusing on biological adaptation strategies that could benefit our forces. Of course, agreed readily. I'm honored to contribute to your scientific endeavors. What didn't realize was that research was about to take on an entirely different focus. Over the next several weeks, she would use her assigned laboratory access to establish communication networks, coordinate resistance activities, and begin implementing the psychological warfare strategies that were humanity's best hope for survival. The occupation settled into a routine over the following days. Forces maintained strict control over all station activities, but they seemed content to let civilian operations continue as long as there was no sign of resistance. It was exactly the kind of administrative oversight that and her operatives had been counting on. Dr. James Wright, officially a mineral processing specialist, had been assigned to analyze asteroid samples for the. In reality, he was using his laboratory equipment to manufacture specialized explosives and surveillance devices. Dr. Sarah, supposedly researching atmospheric composition, was actually mapping communication protocols and command structures. Each of the operatives was using their cover assignments to gather intelligence and prepare for the next phase of operations. The pattern is consistent across all 17 occupied systems, reported during a covert meeting in one of the station's maintenance shafts. They are following standard occupation protocols, focusing on resource extraction and population control. They're not expecting organized resistance. Agent nodded grimly. Intelligence reports from other systems confirm similar conditions. They've got overwhelming military superiority, but they're vulnerable to unconventional tactics. It was the moment had been planning for since the Project Nightshade briefings began. They had achieved conventional military victory, but they had also placed themselves in positions where asymmetric warfare could be devastatingly effective. Phase 2 begins tomorrow, announced. Remember, our objective isn't to achieve military victory, it's to make occupation more expensive than they're willing to pay. The first operation began at 3:47 station time, when a series of carefully placed explosives disabled the main communication relay connecting the research station to the fleet. To the occupying forces, it appeared to be a technical malfunction, the kind of equipment failure that was common on aging research facilities. Or was annoyed but not particularly concerned. Repair teams will restore communications within 6 hours, he informed his subordinates. continue normal operations. What he didn't know was that the malfunction had been designed to create specific patterns of system failure that would mask the installation of monitoring devices throughout the station's computer network. By the time communications were restored, his team had access to every data transmission, personnel file, and operational plan. The intelligence windfall was extraordinary. Learned that they had committed nearly 60% of their total military capacity to the current invasion, leaving their home systems minimally defended. More importantly, she discovered that several key commanders had serious reservations about the expansion campaign, but had been overruled by the aggressive faction that currently controlled military policy. "This changes everything," she reported to Colonel Harrison during an encrypted communication session hidden within routine scientific data transmissions. "They're not as unified as they appear, and they're more vulnerable than we thought." Recommendations. Had spent hours analyzing the intelligence data, looking for exploitable weaknesses in the strategic position. "We target their internal divisions, make the occupation costly enough that the moderate faction can challenge the expansionists politically." How? Psychological warfare. Make them doubt their own capabilities, question their leadership, and fear the consequences of continued expansion. "We can't beat them militarily, but we can make them beat themselves politically." Over the following weeks, this network began implementing a campaign of psychological manipulation that was unprecedented in its scope and sophistication. They started small, with minor sabotage operations that created the impression of organized resistance without revealing the true extent of human capabilities. Equipment malfunctions became common throughout occupied facilities. Computer systems experienced glitches that corrupted data files. Life support systems required constant maintenance. Transportation networks suffered from mysterious delays and coordination failures. Each incident was individually minor and apparently unrelated, but collectively, they created an atmosphere of uncertainty and inefficiency that began to wear on morale. More importantly, they created opportunities for operatives to gather additional intelligence and establish broader networks of resistance contacts. "The humans are more resilient than anticipated," reported during a routine briefing with OR. "Their technological systems are unreliable, but their personnel continue to function effectively despite occupation stress." It was an assessment that found deeply satisfying. They were attributing human effectiveness to psychological resilience rather than active resistance, exactly the misperception she had been hoping to create. The campaign escalated gradually, with each phase designed to increase concerns while maintaining the appearance of spontaneous civilian resistance rather than coordinated military action. His background in psychological warfare proved invaluable as she crafted operations that would have maximum impact on confidence while minimizing the risk of provoking massive retaliation. The breakthrough came during the 6th week of occupation, whence monitoring of communications revealed a heated debate between Orr and his superiors in the high command. The conversation, conducted in what they believed was a secure channel, revealed growing doubts about the invasion's cost-effectiveness. "Losses are approaching 15% across all occupied systems," Orr reported. "Not from direct military action, but from operational inefficiencies, equipment failures, and unexplained accidents. Our forces are becoming demoralized." The response from high command was predictably aggressive. Implement stricter control measures, increase surveillance, execute suspected resistance leaders. But could hear the uncertainty in their voices. They had expected easy conquest and efficient occupation. Instead, they were dealing with mysterious problems that seemed to get worse rather than better despite their efforts to address them. Phase 3 announced during her next covert meeting, "We make them afraid." The fear campaign began with carefully orchestrated accidents that targeted personnel in ways that seemed random, but followed patterns that would be recognizable to anyone trained in psychological warfare analysis. Individual soldiers began experiencing equipment malfunctions at critical moments. Communication breakdowns occurred during important operations. Supply deliveries went to wrong locations or arrived with crucial components missing. Each incident was explicable individually, but collectively they created the impression that some malevolent intelligence was actively working against interests. knew that the military mindset was oriented toward direct confrontation with identifiable enemies. Facing an opponent they couldn't see or directly engage was psychologically devastating. The tipping point came when operatives managed to infiltrate a restricted military database and plant carefully crafted intelligence, suggesting that human resistance capabilities were far more extensive and sophisticated than previously believed. The fabricated data indicated that Earth had secretly developed advanced military technologies and deployed covert operatives throughout the galaxy years before first contact. The implications are staggering, reported after analyzing the planted intelligence. If this data is accurate, the humans have been preparing for galactic warfare far longer than we realized. Their apparent weakness may have been elaborate deception. Watch the response with professional satisfaction. They were beginning to question everything they thought they knew about human capabilities, exactly the psychological state she had been working to create. Fear of the unknown was replacing confidence in superior strength. The final phase began when received confirmation that similar operations across all 17 occupied systems were achieving comparable results. The occupation forces were experiencing coordinated resistance that seemed to be escalating despite their efforts to suppress it. More importantly, the economic and personnel costs of maintaining their expanded territory were becoming prohibitively expensive. This came when she arranged for to discover a fabricated human intelligence document outlining a plan for systematic sabotage operations across all territory, including their home systems. The document was carefully crafted to suggest capabilities that humans didn't actually possess, but which were plausible enough to be taken seriously by intelligence analysts. The humans have infiltrated our home systems, reported to an emergency command meeting. If this intelligence is accurate, they have the capability to conduct sabotage operations throughout space. Listen to the meeting through her monitoring devices, watching as the leadership grappled with the possibility that their entire strategic position had been compromised. The aggressive faction that had pushed for the invasion was now facing challenges from moderate leaders who had opposed the expansion from the beginning. Our forces are overextended, argued Science Cast leader Iran. We cannot maintain effective control of 17 systems while also defending our home territory against infiltration operations. We cannot show weakness by retreating, or countered, though his confidence was clearly shaken. This is not retreat, Iran replied. This is strategic redeployment to address a threat we did not anticipate. The debate continued for hours, but could see that the outcome was inevitable. They had achieved their military objectives, but the cost of maintaining those gains was becoming unsustainable. More importantly, they were now facing the possibility that their home territory was vulnerable to the same kind of unconventional warfare that was making their occupation increasingly difficult. The withdrawal began 3 weeks later, disguised as a strategic consolidation of forces to address emerging threats. The maintained face by claiming victory while quietly abandoning most of their conquered territory. From a conventional military perspective, they had achieved their objectives and chosen to consolidate their gains rather than risk overextension. Knew better, humanity had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had defeated a superior military force through psychological warfare and strategic deception. They hadn't been outfought, they had been outthought. Mission accomplished, she reported to Colonel Harrison during their final encrypted communication. Forces are withdrawing from all human systems and most other occupied territories. They're maintaining face by claiming strategic victory, but they've essentially abandoned their expansion campaign. Casualties. Minimal, fewer than 200 human personnel lost across all systems, mostly from operational accidents rather than direct conflict. Losses were similarly limited. We achieved strategic victory without major bloodshed. It was the outcome had hoped for from the beginning. Humanity had demonstrated that physical superiority wasn't the only path to military success, and they had done so without the massive casualties that conventional warfare would have required. The aftermath was complex and far-reaching. The galactic community struggled to understand how humans had achieved what appeared to be impossible, the peaceful resolution of a military crisis that should have resulted in either human extinction or devastating galactic war. Herself returned to her legitimate research career. though she remained available for consultation on matters of psychology and conflict resolution. Her official reports described the withdrawal as the result of natural economic and logistical limitations rather than active resistance, maintaining the fiction that human capabilities remained limited. Dr. Xenobiology researcher published several well-regarded papers on survival adaptations in hostile environments. Her work was particularly noted for its insights into psychological resilience and adaptive strategy development. She became a sought-after consultant for species dealing with environmental challenges and social adaptation issues. What the galactic community never learned was the true extent of human military capabilities or the sophisticated intelligence networks that had made the victory possible. His appearance as a fragile academic had been perfect camouflage for one of the most successful military operations in human history. They themselves never fully understood what had happened to them. Their official records attributed the withdrawal to strategic considerations and successful achievement of primary objectives. Privately, many commanders remained convinced that humans possessed secret military capabilities that made continued expansion inadvisable. The humans are more dangerous than they appear, Orr noted in his final report. Future interactions should proceed with extreme caution. Found this assessment particularly satisfying. The galaxy would continue to see humans as physically limited and technologically inferior, never realizing that those apparent weaknesses had been transformed into strategic advantages through careful planning and psychological sophistication. 5 years later, stood once again on the observation deck of a space station, this time watching human colonist ships departing for newly discovered star systems in sectors that had once been considered too dangerous for expansion. The galaxy had learned to respect human capabilities without fully understanding them, creating opportunities for peaceful expansion that would have been impossible through conventional military strength. They had resumed their expansion activities, but they avoided human space entirely and limited themselves to significantly smaller and more cautious operations. Other species had noted this change in behavior and drawn their own conclusions about human defensive capabilities. Smiled as she watched the colonist ships disappear into hyperspace. Humanity had achieved something remarkable. They had become genuinely powerful without anyone fully realizing how or why. Their apparent fragility remained their greatest strategic asset and intended to keep it that way. She had spent her career studying how species adapted to survive in hostile environments. Now she was living proof that the most effective survival strategies weren't always the most obvious ones. Sometimes, the greatest strength came from being underestimated. The galaxy had learned that humans were more dangerous than they appeared, but they still hadn't learned why. Planned to keep it that way for as long as possible. After all, the best weapons were the ones your enemies never saw coming. As she returned to her laboratory to continue her legitimate research, reflected on the irony of her situation. She was genuinely passionate about studying adaptive evolution and survival strategies. The fact that her research had practical military applications was simply a bonus. Humanity would continue to expand, explore, and adapt, always appearing less threatening than they actually were. And if anyone ever again made the mistake of underestimating human fragility, and operatives like her would be ready to teach them the same lesson they had learned. Sometimes the most dangerous opponents were those who looked least dangerous. The galaxy was finally beginning to understand that truth, even if they didn't fully grasp its implications. Its work was far from over, but the foundation had been laid. Humanity would never again face the threat of easy conquest, because potential enemies would never again be certain of what they were really facing. Uncertainty was often more powerful than strength, and doubt more effective than force. The fragile human species had learned to weaponize their apparent weakness, turning evolutionary limitations into strategic advantages. It was, thought, exactly the kind of adaptive evolution that had made humans successful in the first place. They had been underestimated one too many times. Now, the galaxy would never make that mistake again.